Hey everyone, welcome to Craving Something Scary, where it's all horror all the time. Now we are less than 2 weeks away from Scream 5 hitting the theaters, and it's time to start finalizing theories and predictions. In this video, I'm going to bring together all of my ideas into one video of how we could possibly see the return of Stu Macher in Scream 5. Let's do it! So in previous videos and discussions, I have shared my views and ideas of how we could possibly see Stu return to the new Scream film, and while it may not likely happen, I do believe it is still plausible that if Radio Silence wants to do it, whether in Scream 5 or Scream 6 and beyond, it can be done, and it is not impossible. Now I want to say up front, I know many of you watching this video absolutely hate the idea of Stu returning, and that is perfectly fine. We do not have to agree on every theory. That's kind of the beauty of it. But having said that, I also want to share that I make no apologies whatsoever for loving the character of Stu Macher and for my desire to see him return. It's real, it's passionate, and I do not apologize for it. Now, for those of you who have followed the channel for a while, this is not a surprise to you. You guys already know how much I love Stu Macher, the character Stu Macher, and how much I want to see him back in the franchise. So, for all of you who are Stu fans and want to see him return to the franchise just as I do, here is my theory of how it could possibly happen. Picture with me now, it's 1996. The closing scene of Scream. Gail is reporting as the events just ended, and Dewey's being lifted into an ambulance as he did not die in the attacks. Camera fades to the sunrise and the end credits begin. But that's not where the story ends. What happens after the camera fades? Well, that's where the real story of this video is. Soon after Dewey is whisked away to the hospital, a second ambulance arrives on the scene to take another survivor to the hospital due to his being in critical condition. But this is not just a survivor. Oh, no. This is one half of the duo responsible for the Woodsboro massacre. Now, after finding him with 3 stab wounds and head trauma from a television being dropped on his face, Stu Macher had a pulse. He was unconscious, but he was breathing and had a pulse. So he was rushed away and spent weeks in ICU as he slowly recovered and regained enough strength for plastic surgery on his face to be conducted. And once he was healed enough to leave the hospital, his criminal trial soon began. Stu's parents were wealthy people. We could see by their incredible home and the location of where they were at that this was a family with a lot of resources. We even see them with a boat in their driveway just to drive the point home. So, Stu's parents hired a dream team of defense lawyers, consisting of the very best attorneys money can buy. They carefully construct a defense built around a mixture of criminal insanity and the overall mental incapacity for Stu to break away from Billy's manipulative hold, which exposed Stu's mental psychosis and his insanity. Plus, add the fact that Stu was a minor as well. Put all that together, and the lawyers performed brilliantly, along with their expert witnesses who supported the idea of Stu's condition. Ultimately, the jury viewed Stu as a victim himself, and Billy as the real culprit and mastermind who was manipulating and controlling the, quote, weaker-minded Stu. Now, after Stu's legal defense team finished working over that jury, Their mindset resulted in finding Stu guilty by reason of insanity. His punishment was to serve a life sentence in a psychiatric criminal facility. So, Stu begins his life sentence and lives every day with a burning passion to one day escape and return to Woodsboro. For 25 years, Stu lives as a model patient. I mean, he had a great attitude, he kept to himself for the most part, but as he demonstrated his best behavior to the doctors and nurses, over time, he started earning privileges. He was granted computer time each week where he began to look up his family in Woodsboro and reminisce. He was even granted email permission so he could stay in touch with his relatives. But the only thing is, none of his relatives wanted anything to do with him. They considered him dead to the family and refused to accept his messages or any communications whatsoever. They completely abandoned him forever. That's it. They want nothing to do with him for the rest of their lives. Well, this only angers Stu, and it fuels that raging fire within him as he feels betrayed, abandoned, and left behind by those he thought loved him. He thought these people were his family, that, yeah, he did horrible things, but they're going to support him. They're going to love him through this and still be there in some way. But they were not. Now, as time passed, he began receiving letters in the mail at the facility where he was staying at from admirers. And in the last, say, 3 to 5 years, he began receiving emails as well. And there were a couple of people who would email him and identify themselves as being loyal and committed to him and who loved what he did back in 1996. Now, these two individuals, they never gave their names, but they knew a lot of details from the murders, so they've done their homework, and they might even have some type of inside connection to the past. So, the 25-year anniversary of the murders approach, and by this time, Stu has earned outside privileges at the facility, and he's even been granted status of a trustee, overseeing other patients. And after writing emails for quite some time, they have a coded language so that those who are in charge of the facility who monitor communications could not really understand the messages between Stu and these two individuals. They appeared one way, but meant something else completely to Stu when he would read them. What was really being communicated was Stu's escape plan. Now, it was in motion. He was outside near the front gate as he oversaw a small group of people picking up trash, for example. And then all of a sudden, a van pulls up, the door slides open, and Stu is pulled inside for the escape. It's a stolen van with no plates. They get away, and Stu goes into hiding. As they now begin to execute, the first 3 attacks in Scream 5. So in my theory, Stu is the mastermind behind all of the murders in Scream 5, and the 2 individuals who broke him out are the 2 ghost face killers in the movie. They carry out his plan to kill people related to Billy and himself because he was rejected by all of them after everything that happened. They discarded Stu like he was dead meat to their lives, and now he is going to kill all of those related to him, and he's also doing the same to Billy's family. Since Billy did not survive, he's almost saying, Billy, I'm going to do it for you too. And that's why relatives of the original killers, Billy and Stu, are the first 3 attacks in the movie, because that is whose rage Stu is venting towards. Now, who are these 2 helpers and fans that have been emailing over the last 3 to 5 years? That's a great question. We're going to have to wait 11 more days to find out who they are. If radio silence brings Stu back in Scream 5. Big if. All right, so that is my theory of just one way you could bring Stu back in a plausible manner. Now, I'm not saying it's the only way, but I do feel that it's the way that probably makes the most sense and could be pulled off in a successful manner. Now, before I wrap up, I want to address 3 popular objections that I commonly hear to seeing Stu return. Objection number 1. Stu died in Scream 96. False. It's widely known as fact that Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson both intended for Stu to return to the franchise, as he did survive the events of Scream 96. Scream 3 was written and approved for filming, with the storyline of Stu being alive in prison and orchestrating the murders of Scream 3 with a group of cult-like followers who would reveal that all of them who appeared to be stabbed and killed in the finale would all stand up and reveal that they were in a cult of Stu followers who basically they worshipped him. Okay? Now, because of Columbine events, the tragedy, Wes and Kevin had to scrap that idea, and they rewrote a new story. Well, mostly Wes, because Kevin couldn't write Scream 3 at that time because he'd already written that script. So Wes and Aaron Kruger had to write a story for Scream 3. So we can debate all day long whether he could survive 3 stab wounds and the TV incident or not. But here's where I cash out. If Wes Craven himself had him surviving the attacks and Kevin Williamson writing a plausible backstory for it, then I need no more evidence than that. In my book, Stu Macher survived that night, and in Wes Craven's book, he did as well. Okay, next up, objection number 2 I commonly hear is, why did the OG3 never mention Stu was alive in the sequels? Well, there's a very simple answer to this. The reason the OG3 never mentioned Stu being alive was because he was locked away in a criminal psychiatric facility for life. Now, he's not getting out on parole, so when the murders happen again in Scream 2 through 4, there's no need to discuss Stu as a suspect because he's locked up. I mean, and for Scream 2 and 3, those don't even occur. Well, actually, Scream 2 doesn't even occur in California. And although Hollywood, we do see that return in Scream 3, they're back in Hollywood, in California rather. But again, he's locked up, and he's and so there's no reason to do that. It's the same reason it would have worked had they been able to put Scream 3 out as intended in that first version, because the characters in the movie never would have suspected Stu then either, because he would have been in prison. So that principle applied then, if that had happened, and it applies now to Scream 5. And in my theory that I shared a moment ago, it works. So if you know someone is locked away for life, you don't have a reason to consider them a suspect, and thus there's no need to really talk about him in the sequels by the OG3. And finally, objection number 3 that I often hear is that if Stu were alive, it would have been all over the news. And listen, I completely agree. And it would absolutely have been all over the news. It would have been headline news. However, remember this, Scream 2 occurs 2 years after the events of Scream 1. So even the biggest news stories we get in this world every day, they're old news after 2 years. I mean, there are no headlines being written about the Woodsboro massacre 2 years later in the national news circuit. It's just not happening. It doesn't happen in the world we live in either. And remember, Windsor College is in Ohio. they will most certainly not be writing about a 2-year-old murder case or case of murders that occurred in California. So the media not talking about Stu objection, it just doesn't hold water. I mean, now let's say if Scream 2 had occurred, let's say a week later, like if they just started right back up, either the night of or the week later or even a month later, then I would say, okay, there's something to that. That's something you got to work through, because that would make a lot more sense. But we're talking about 2 years, and we're talking about being in a whole different state across the country. So that whole theory there, or not theory, but that whole objection rather to this theory, it just doesn't hold up in my book. So those are the big 3 objections I typically hear regarding Stu coming back. So I did want to at least touch on them here in this video with my theory. But no matter, guys, how you may feel about Stu and the idea of him returning to Scream, we can all agree that creating our theories and possibilities is a ton of fun, and it makes for great discussion. 11 more days, guys. 11 more days. We are almost there. Now, I want to know what you think about my theory of Stu coming back, and what do you think about it? Do you think it's possible, not possible? Do you have a different theory of how it could work? Because like I said, I know it's not. I'm not saying it's the only one. So what ideas do you have? I want to hear all about them. Is Stu coming back in Scream 5 or not? Or a future movie? It doesn't have to be Scream 5. Just period to the franchise. I want to hear your opinions, your ideas, your thoughts and theories. So start leaving your comments below right now so we can discuss it together. Well, that's it for this update, but I'll be back soon with more Scream and other horror movie content. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time, this is Craven Something Scary, where it's all horror all the time. Thank you for watching.